Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, a nostalgic look back at our favorite Rangers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm Tom Browning, along with my co-host Rod Berger. We can be heard on Google Play, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and of course, our website at gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. That's gotommyboyproductions.libsyn.com. Please check it out. You can capture all of our episodes on our webpage. You can contact us by just clicking on the contact bar. You can access all of our episodes. You can leave a message. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about the players that you would like for us to profile. Love to hear about maybe some of the seasons other than the 60s, 70s, and 80s that really made an impact on you as a fan. Again, we will be going off the menu every once in a while. We'll be talking about the current day New York Rangers, the state of the franchise, and again, we love to talk about previous playoff games, impactful trades that took place in New York Rangers history. So wherever you listen to us, please hit subscribe. It's free. So without further ado, here are your hosts, Tom Browning and Rod Berger. Welcome to another edition of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. Actually, it's edition number 16. I'm Tom Browning, along with my dear friend and co-host, Rod Berger. Rob, how you doing today, bud?
I'm excellent. We're getting ready for the long, slow hockey offseason, but congrats to the Washington Capitals. Hopefully we see some of that cup action up here soon.
Yeah, I hope so. It was a great playoff series this year, and kudos, like you say, kudos to the Caps, of course, for winning it. Ovi's first Stanley Cup. But you have to hand it to the Vegas Golden Knights. I still think what they did was one of the most amazing accomplishments in my lifetime in all professional sports. Disappointed that they didn't win. I was hoping for a true Cinderella story. Really incredible ending. They won that first game, and I thought they were on their way. But I think if you look back at the series, I think that stop that the great goalie of Brandon Holtby from the Washington Capitals made on, was it Alex Tuck? Was it end of the third period, or was it in overtime? Was it overtime in game two?
No, it was the third period.
Third period. I mean, that was the save of the season. And I think if Tuck scores that goal, we might be looking at a different champion right now. I don't know if Washington comes back being down 2-0, although they did fall behind in the series in the first round, I guess. The Columbus Blue Jackets, who were down, 2-0 and 3-1, I believe. Or was it?
Yeah, when they came back in that series, they came back against Tampa Bay also.
Yeah. So it was a great Stanley Cup, and I hope you're right about the Rangers. I think it's going to be a long rebuild. Islanders made some moves, getting Lou Lamoriello, and I expect very, exciting things for the Islanders. I think Lou is going to do a great job, and of course you got Ray Shero, doing some great things already with the Devils. So I think the Rangers are going to be hard pressed, to stay even with those two teams. It should be interesting. Jeff Gorton's got his work cut out for him, but we got 3 first-round draft picks, so. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the summer unfolds with trades and draft picks and everything else, And
not only we'll be busy with the draft picks, both the Rangers and Islanders have a ton of cap space.
Tell us more about that. What are you finding out about the cap situations?
Well, the Islanders have almost $30 million in cap space. The Rangers have $25 million in cap space. They've got a lot of players they need to sign.
Yep.
But I think we know where the Islanders are going to go with Lamoriello. I'm not convinced yet that the Rangers are rebuilding. I think they're going to go after some of these big names, whether it be Carlson or Neal or Stastny. Will be interesting to see what happens to JT91, to see where Tavares ends up. How much the rumors did the Doug Weight thing leaving impact him, pro, con? But I still think the Rangers are making go of it. They still have Lundqvist on the hook for a few more years, and I think Gordon wants to win.
Yeah, the cynical side of me thinks you're right, but I think it's totally the wrong decision from the New York Rangers. I think they really need to bite the bullet. Now's the time to rebuild. They started off on the right track this past spring. But I'm afraid you're right. James Dolan has never been one to advocate a rebuild. I don't think going after James Neal right now is the way to go. I don't think John Tavares is want to come to the New York Rangers. I mean, he can make the money with the Islanders. He doesn't want to rebuild right now. He wants a sure thing. He wants to go with a team where he can win a Stanley Cup, whether it's Toronto, whether it's Vegas or San Jose. I think there are so many teams that are going to be in on JT who feel they're only a player or two away. I don't think the Rangers, if they're honest with themselves, if they think they're one or two players away from the Stanley Cup. Kovalchuk, I don't think that's the right move either. I would think Lou Lamoriello would probably have the inside on that one. Maybe a West Coast team like LA or San Jose. I mean, like we talked about before the show started, just got back from the West Coast. But Rob, you could be right. I mean, that is what the Rangers do. They just try to. I think this year will tell whether the Rangers are really committed to building a Stanley Cup champion or just playing the Russian roulette, rolling the dice of see what happens if we make the playoffs. I think this will tell the tale what the future is going to look like with the New York Rangers.
I can't imagine Kovalchuk not coming to a team like the Rangers. It's a perfect fit for him. I don't know if it's a perfect fit for the Rangers, but the Rangers have money to spend. They have room on the top lines for him. They're not that far out. You talk about LA and San Jose. The Kings have absolutely no cap space. They have the least amount of cap space in the NHL right now. So unless they could find someone to take that Dustin Brown contract, I can't see Kovalchuk showing up in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, does Kovalchuk want to win a Stanley Cup, or is he just looking to make as much money as he can here in the NHL? I guess that.
Yeah, I'll keep my opinion on that to myself.
All right. Well, today's episode, I think, is going to be very interesting because we're talking about a player who's going to have his jersey retired by the New York Rangers this upcoming season. A player by the name of Vic Hadfield, number 11. When I was a kid growing up, he was my dad's favorite New York Ranger. And because it was my dad's favorite Ranger, he and Reggie Fleming were the two favorite players for my dad. And they were instantly the two favorite Rangers for me, too, when I was a kid growing up. Two hard-nosed, physical players that in the history of the New York Rangers were never known for their physicality, physical hockey players. But Vic Hadfield was a very interesting player for the New York Rangers. And, we'll get into his background a little bit, but he was signed by the Chicago Blacouts organization in the early 1960s. Physical player, was hoping to play alongside his friend Bobby Hull. It never turned out, never materialized. He didn't really blossom in the Blackhawks organization, and he was exposed in the interleague draft. I guess it was 1961, and the Rangers picked him up. And, a very physical player, not known for his skating ability or his offensive credentials, but as we'll talk about, Rob, he blossomed into a pretty good goal scorer, had one outstanding year with the Rangers where he scored 50 goals. But the thing I liked about Vic Hadfield was that he was a two-way hockey player, protected his teammates, was a very physical player, a sandpaper type, grinding forward, where he was once my favorite player. By the end of his career, he was one of the Ranger players that I was the most frustrated with. And we'll get into the reasons why in a minute. What are your thoughts about what you've read about Vic Hadfield?
Yeah, you bring up the physical aspect of his game, which is so important about who he was, especially at the beginning of his career. His first full season with the Rangers, he led which was 63-64. He led the league in penalty minutes.
Yeah, 150 penalty minutes, right?
Yeah, and in fact, he had over 100 penalty minutes, five different seasons. Including the bit, 142 penalty minutes in his big 71-72 campaign.
Yeah.
When he got the start on that goal a game line, it wasn't for offense. It was because, it was really to go out there and protect Ratelle and Gilbert and make sure someone was watching them, join that line because of an injury. And once he got going, things really turned around for him offensively.
That's true. He was, Emile Francis said, listen, I can't have these guys getting beat up every game. And they were getting beat up. And they moved him up to that first line. I guess that was 66-67 season. And you're right. That was after he led the National Hockey League in penalty minutes with 150. He scored 20 goals for the New York Rangers, I think 8 seasons out of the 11. Maybe it was 8 consecutive seasons. He may have scored over 20 goals with that 150-goal season in 71-72. And he was a fan favorite. He became captain. He succeeded Bob Nevin as captain for the New York Rangers after the Rangers traded Bob Nevin after the 71-72 season. The thing that really frustrated me with Vic Hadfield is he stopped doing what made him successful. It really started, I think, even though he had 142 penalty minutes the year he scored 50 goals. I need to go back, and I really should have done a better job in looking into this before the show today. I needed to see just how many fighting majors he had that season when he scored 50 goals. He had quite a few, I believe, when he led the league in 65, I think, when he had 150 minutes in penalties. He was one of the league's best fighters. And the Rangers had Orland Kurtenbach at the time, probably the best heavyweight fighter the Rangers ever had in their organization. And they had Reggie Fleming, a very pugnacious, hard-hitting defenseman, albeit on the shorter side. But Vic Hadfield made his mark in the National Hockey League, earned his spot with the Rangers by being a physical, intimidating forward. And I thought that eluded him. He stopped when he started scoring goals, when he found his offensive game. I think that hurt the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Boston Bruins. It hurt them in the 73-74 playoffs against the Philadelphia Flyers, where the Rangers needed to check the Bruins' physical players like Wayne Cashman and the Flyers with Dave Schultz. And I really thought that he let his team down. I know it's a strong statement to say for a guy who's going to have his jersey retired, but I really thought that the Rangers could have won a cup or two if Vic Hadfield really played, when he found his offensive game, if he continued to play that type of game, the Rangers may have won a cup or two, in 71-72 and maybe even 73-74. And that's what really frustrated me about Vic Hadfield. He just totally focused on his offense. I don't think he protected his teammates as well as he didn't commit himself to that maybe as like he should have.
And when do you think that started?
I think it started actually a year or two before he scored his 50th goal. I noticed a change in the way he played. Now, he did battle some injuries. I know he broke his thumb against Rosier Paymont one season, and it may have been a season or two before he scored his 50th goal. He did battle some injuries, and rumor has it that in the 73-74 series against the Flyers that he was battling an ankle-foot injury that kept him from being as physical. But I don't know. I mean, he just was. It was noticeable that he was not the same type of physical forward. It was almost after that playoff series, like it was 70-71 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They had that big. I was at the game actually, my buddy and I, in the playoffs. The Rangers beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 6 games, and we were at the game where Vic Hadfield, during a brawl, flipped Bernie Perron's face mask into the Madison Square Garden crowd, delaying the game for about 40 minutes. But after that season, he seemed like he changed his game dramatically and almost forgot about the rough physical style, almost like he wanted to protect himself. And I know he wanted the big money. That was around the time of the WHA, too. The Rangers signed a lot of their big players. All the teams did. They signed their big players to lucrative contracts to keep the WHA from raiding the team. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it, Rob, but it was noticeable, It
was later in his career, right? He got that big contract, after the 73 season? He got a huge deal.
Yep.
Just to not go up to the WHA.
And that was yeah.
No, I was gonna say. So do you have, what is your opinion of retiring his jersey? You think it's a bit of revisionist history?
Yeah, I do. It's funny you and I talked about this when I did the Jean Ratelle bonus, retiring his jersey. I thought it was somewhat poetic justice that the third and final member of that gag line have his number retired, but I think I got caught up in the moment a little bit. I just that 73-74 Flyers series really today, I think it eats a lot of Ranger fans of my generation. It eats us up because not only was he not physical in series, but the Rangers in that Game 7 in Philadelphia, they came back from being down 2 goals. They were pressing for the tying goal. And unfortunately, the Rangers had it was a bogus call, but they had too many men on the ice penalty with about a minute to go in that game. And Vic Hadfield was designated to sit in the penalty box. And he's got a big smile on it. He's chuckling in the penalty box. You're down by a goal with a minute left from being eliminated by the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, I know that Brad Park has done a lot of explaining on this. Vic Hadfield has done a lot of explaining on this. But I don't care what the reason was. He says that the penalty keeper, a National Hockey League employer, told him that they were proud of the game that the New York Rangers played, coming in here and playing a competitive game against the Flyers. And there was other talk about the Flyer fans, harassing Hadfield, and he just chuckling about it. But I don't care what the reason is. You're not chuckling about anything when you're down by a goal. You just had too many men on the ice penalty, and your season is a minute away from being ended by the first time an expansion team ever beat an established original six team in the playoffs. You don't act that way. To me, that was always the blackest of marks against Vic Hadfield.
His personality was definitely the trademark of who he was in terms of that, or in terms of leaving the series with Russia early.
Yeah.
The Summit Series in '72, which also it's a different time, so he couldn't go on Twitter and explain why he was leaving, and he wasn't the only one to leave either. But him laughing in the box, his reaction to the trade, how him and his lawyer commented about the Rangers. Also, it's interesting to see guys like that come back and have their numbers retired, and the relationship with the organization.
I agree, Rob. That Summit Series was another black mark. You had an all-star, NHL all-star team playing the most important international series of its day, the 1972 Summit Series. And you're coming off a 50-goal season. You're coming off a Stanley Cup final. You're used sparingly in the first two scrimmages or exhibition games in Sweden. I don't care. You're named to this very important team. You don't pack your bags and leave. And to me, that was... again, it may sound too strong, emblematic or typical, or it was just another negative mark on his resume. And the following year or following 2 years, he pulls that stunt in Philadelphia, and he changes his game from being, a physical forward like a Wayne Cashman. To me, if he had played the same way that Wayne Cashman played, the way Cashman played with Esposito and Ken Hodge, again, the Rangers may have won a cup or two. Wayne Cashman never changed his game. He was still a 25, 30-goal scorer, most intimidating fighter in the league. Gave Espo and Hodge all the room they needed. And Hadfield could have been the same way.
Do you think those Ranger teams were better than those Bruins, Flyers, and Canadiens teams?
They had more skill. Even Gary Dornhofer and Schultz admitted that from a talent perspective, they knew the only way that they could defeat the Rangers in that playoff series was that if they drew them into third man in fighting majors, that the Rangers had the skill. And the Rangers demonstrated that at all three home games at Madison Square Garden. And even to an extent in Game 7 against Philadelphia, they came back and they actually outplayed Philadelphia in large swaths of that game. But Schultz's he mentions it in his book or maybe in a newspaper article, that their goal was to get Brad Park or one of the other Ranger players to join in on the third man in fighting penalty to get some of their talent off the ice. The Rangers didn't do it. The Rangers did not go. They were told not to go in. Emile Francis told not to go in. If this happened to Philadelphia, you'd have 5 or 6 guys on you in no time. To me, there's just no excuse. But they were, I think, a better skilled team than the Flyers were during that particular season. Bobby Orr, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Except for one position, and that was in goal.
Oh, yeah, Bernie Perrant, of course. Although the Rangers had Eddie Jacquemin, and he was no slouch, a Hall of Fame goaltender, but Bernie had a lights-out career in Philadelphia. In that particular season, he was just incredible. He really was.
The devil's advocate to the revisionist history is that Hadfield is still, at least by the numbers, one of the greatest Rangers of all time.
Yeah, he is.
And if you look at the only people ahead of him in goals for the Rangers are Gilbert, Ratelle, Graves, and Bathgate.
Mm-hmm.
He's 10th in assists. He's 9th in points, 7th in games played, 5th in penalty minutes. He is, an all-time great Ranger in terms of what he's done on the ice for the organization. So I'm surprised that the team has done so little around that line, around that celebrating. You go to other organizations, whether it be the Punch Line or the Triple Crown Line in LA. The team recognizes them rather often, and I don't see that too often with the Rangers with this line.
No, you're right. And I think he's the leading all-time left winger in goal scoring for the Rangers. I don't know if anyone has surpassed him, but I think he's still the highest scoring left winger in Rangers history. He was a captain.
He's also the first Ranger to score 50 goals.
Yeah, and he was only the 6th player at the time to do it.
And only two other Rangers have done it since then.
Yeah, Yager and Graves. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think at the time you had Johnny Busick, Esposito, Bobby Hull, Maurice Richard, and who else? I think that's 6.
Yep.
Yeah, and at the time that he did. Oh, listen, the guy, he was my favorite Ranger right in the very beginning. He was the fan favorite, but he did some things in the middle to the latter part of his career that really were, you just shake your head. And leaving the Summit Series was huge. That was a huge black mark. And the Philadelphia, the optics, I can't think of any reason that you're smiling when you're a minute away from elimination. I just can't think of, that's an Odell Beckham moment right now. That's, can you imagine if that happened today? Any player, it would be on every sports channel. The fans would just be running you out of town immediately if that ever happened to an athlete today in such an important game. Well,
how about this? Would you agree that it was a bad trade when they sent him away?
Oh, for Dick Beverly? Oh, of course. And he wound up scoring he had two 30-goal seasons with Pittsburgh. Rob, that's a tough one. Does he deserve to have his number retired? I don't know. I'm still, I go back and forth on this. He was a very charismatic guy. He was a practical joke in the locker room. He was known for his nailing shoes down in the players' stalls in the locker room. He was a real practical joker, and really, he was a good guy. He was Bobby Hull's good friend. As a matter of fact, Bobby Hull was the one that turned him onto a curved stick that many believe contributed to his ability to start scoring goals in the league. He had a very hard slap shot. He was a very interesting player. Never was great in the playoffs. I think he had that 1 year in 71-72. Did very, very well. He scored quite a few goals in their march to the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't know how many he had. I don't know if you had the stats in front of you there, but
yeah, he was a point a game guy in 71-72 in those playoffs. 7 goals, 9 assists. That he did do well.
Yeah.
In those with a couple power play goals. So here we are. Then I know we're supposed to be talking about Vic Hadfield, but after this jersey is retired, and 94 has essentially been taken care of. Is this it for a while for the Rangers?
Yeah, I don't know. It's I'm trying to think of who else they can retire. You made a good point about the Rangers kind of forgetting a couple of their players from the 70s and the 80s who really made an impact in the organization. Gilbert has always been and still is a very visible piece, an important piece of the Rangers franchise history. I think the Boston Bruins' success that John Ratelle had, very controversial trade, I think conspired against him until just recently. I think, the Rangers organization held that against. They shouldn't have. They're the ones that made the trade with Boston, but I think Ratelle's success with the Bruins, his willingness to spend a large part of his post-player career with the Bruins organization as a coach and a scout, contributed to the delay in getting him on board. And I really do think the Summit Series and the Philadelphia Flyers Series had a lot to do with Vic Hadfield not being his number being raised to the rafters until just now. And I think the Rangers are trying to salvage some of that history. I think the Rangers are being very reactive. They're seeing how other teams across the league are honoring their the earlier players in franchise history, and I think they were scrambling a little bit to get Ratelle and Hadfield back into the fold. I think Brad Park has to be next. I think Brad Park was the best defenseman in New York Rangers history when I was a kid growing up, better than Harry Howell. He was second only to Bobby Orr and Dennis Potvin during the 70s and 80s. And I think Brad Park, should have had his number retired way before Vic Hadfield. One could argue that he should have had his number retired even before Jean Ratelle, but at least at the very same time as Jean Ratelle. So that would be my recommendation. That would be my hope that Brad Park is next.
Yeah, I think the only thing that hurts Brad Park is his limited time in New York. You talk about games played with the organization. He falls a little low on that list. Although what he did while he was here, you could probably argue is a little better than Vic Hadfield.
Oh, definitely. He's a Hall of Famer, and he was Vic Hadfield was never the second best left winger in National Hockey League, even when he was playing. He made one. I think he made 2 All-Star teams, one in '65 with the Rangers, and then the year he scored 50 goals. But Vic Hadfield was never one of the top left. He was a top left winger, but he was never the top 3 to 5. Brad Park was number 2. He made 8 or 9 All-Star teams. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was he was Norris Trophy candidate year in and year out. Only Potvin and Orr kept him from winning those awards. But, Brad Park helped turn that Ranger team into one of the top teams. The Rangers were scuffling since 1950 to field a franchise that was respected in the National Hockey League. And it wasn't until guys like Ratelle, Gilbert, and Park joined that team in the 60s that turned that Ranger team into one of the top powerhouses in the National Hockey League. So he helped contribute, put the Rangers back on the map, and the Rangers were able to sustain that. But they started it. It was those late 1960s teams, Rob, the beginning of the modern era of hockey that really changed the fortunes of the New York Rangers. For that alone, I think Brad Park needs to be his number 2 needs to be hung up with Brian Leetch.
I will say this though about Vic Hadfield. They don't make a lot of hockey players like him anymore.
No, they don't.
To have a coach publicly say he's putting a player on the top line to protect the other 2 guys, those days are long gone.
Long gone. And that's what really made me so frustrated with him, is because the reasons that got him, the path that he took to his success, he abandoned, I think, to the detriment of his team. He was no longer that intimidating presence. And that's what frustrated so many Ranger fans of my generation with Vic Hadfield. That's the thing, Rob. You hit it right in the head. I mean, you could say that Clark Gillies was put up with Bossy and Trottier for similar reasons. Wayne Cashman was put up on that left wing, with Hodge and Espo for the same reasons. But you're right. Today, although I think, I've got a feeling that's coming back. I kind of think that today's hockey with fewer 50-goal scorers is kind of reminiscent of the way the game was played back in the 70s without the speed. Today's players are far bigger, faster, and stronger. But I got a feeling the game is starting to be played a little bit, similarly to the way they played in the 70s. There was a lot of crashing the net in the 1970s. You see a lot of crashing the net today. I think you're seeing a little bit more offensive defenseman participation. You saw a lot of offensive defensemen in the league back in the 70s and 80s. I think you're starting to see a return of very physical wingers playing in the National Hockey League. You're not seeing the fighting. You'll never see the fighting again. But I got a feeling that the game is starting to take on the look of the 1970s with physical play, crashing the net down low. What do you think?
Well, we'll see. We have Vegas, who's just, the speed. I think that's where it's at. Teams need to be able to do both. They need to be able to crash the net, but keep it at a high tempo. We look back to the early 2010s, I guess we're calling them. It was that slowed down possession hockey. And I think right now, we saw with Winnipeg and Vegas and Washington is really high tempo hockey. You can't slow it down anymore. There's just too much talent out there.
Oh yeah, no, I thought the speed's not going away. The physical play, the physical preparation, the condition of the athletes, that's not changing. No way. I mean, players not going to get slower; they're going to get even more better conditioned and faster. But I think the return to physical play, I think, is definitely here. And I think there's a little bit of an intimidation factor now. I think teams like the Capitals, I thought Vegas, even though they weren't as big a team as the Capitals, I thought they played a very physical game. I thought they really did, especially down low. But I think teams like the Capitals are, and there's a few teams like that play that heavy. Winnipeg Jets. The Kings won a couple of cups playing that way. I think it's coming back. I really, really do.
Yeah, as we bring it back to that Ranger team, it's disappointing because you could argue that was the best run this organization has ever had.
Sustained. Yep.
Yeah, making to the conference finals 3 times in 4 years, making to the cup final that other year. This team hasn't seen a run like that consistently with a tight roster like that. That was broken up and you thought would get better when Esposito, with the rise of Esposito and Maloney. But really, that late 60s, early 70s team should have done more. It's disappointing.
Rob, you're right. I couldn't have said it better. You hit the nail right on the head. You could argue that the teams that Tortorella had were very efficient teams. They were successful. Alain Vigneault had a team that went to Stanley Cup Finals. Very efficient team, successful. But the Rangers have never had, in the modern era, they have never had the sustained success. They never had elite talent consistently throughout their roster like they had in the starting in the middle 60s, really the late 60s, early 70s. Unfortunately, teams like the Boston Bruins, who had equal talent, but they had Bobby Orr and they had a bigger physical team. That was a problem. The Flyers, similar, had some very charismatic, skilled offensive players like Reggie Leach, Rick McLeish, Bobby Clark, Bill Barber, but they had a big physical team. And that's why I say today, skilled teams by themselves cannot win Stanley Cups. You need to have a physical element. Even, the Blackhawks had it, the Kings had it, the Bruins had it this past decade. But unfortunately, the Rangers, and that's why Hadfield was so important to that club. The Rangers never had the physical play. They had Teddy Irvin, who was, he was a pretty decent physical player, with that club. But they needed Vic Hadfield to play a very intimidating game, and they never got that. And that affected them against the Flyers, affected them against the Bruins. They had traded Orlin Kurtenbach, who I think if he had stayed with the Rangers, they may have been able, along with Hadfield playing physically, they may have been able to handle the Bruins and maybe the Flyers. Very successful career. Still on the fence. I don't know. I guess maybe, I guess if I was inclined, I would say not right now for Vic Hadfield. I'm going to say it. I don't think right now. I have to see Brad Park's number retired before I see Vic Hadfield. So I just don't think it's time. I would like to see Vic Hadfield more involved with the organization too. I'd like to see the Rangers put him out in front and center. Maybe there's something he can do now as a retired player, get him back in the good graces of the fans from my generation. Don't know what it is, but maybe there's something he can do to really take some of the bite off, those situations like the Summit Series and the Flyer Series and the Bruins Series. But yeah, so that's kind of my take on it. Anything else, Rob, you want to add to wrap up? Or
Yeah, it was fun talking about him. I'm curious to see the excitement on that night when they retire his jersey.
Well, I'm not expecting a lot. I was disappointed in the Ranger crowd. I don't know if you saw there was so many empty seats at Madison Square Garden.
But that was also before you talk about Ratelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't much longer after. Was that right after the letter went out?
It was. It was in February, but it was before the game. But still, I think that goes, and I think we should do a show on this. The passion level of New York Ranger fans has morphed, has changed incredibly so over the last 15, 20 years. And maybe the Ranger organizations are contributed to this. There's so many years have gone by where they have recognized some of the earlier important franchise players that the newer fan today, and I think newer fans make up the majority of Ranger fans. I think a lot of fans my age have stopped following the team, or they don't have as much passion for the organization as they once did. I think to
go to a Ranger game?
Yeah, to go to a Ranger game or to, to participate in fan forums. I think the newer Ranger fan, the millennial, makes up a lot, I think, of the Rangers hierarchy today, as well as the fan base, because the Ranger organization's management from the 80s and 90s failed, I think, to keep the important players from the 60s and 70s first and foremost in the minds of Ranger fans. I think has contributed to that. So there's too much of a gap, I think, that exists between those types of players. They're not Ranger fans say aren't cognizant, aren't privy to, aren't aware of the impact that these players had on the organization, and I think that's contributed to it. But I was very disappointed in so many empty seats when Jean Ratelle was when he had his night, and the fans didn't seem into it. They just there wasn't they didn't seem to be really into the goings-ons, So I think it's going to be less for Vic Hadfield, I think.
Yeah, you talk about millennials. You need to remember that if you're in your early 30s right now, late 20s, you grew up with bad Ranger teams.
Yeah.
You grew up with a 7-year stretch from 98 or 8 years if you count the lockout where the Rangers didn't even make the playoffs. And then they come back, they lost in the first round, they lost in the second round for a couple of years, lost in the first round for a couple of years after that. I mean, a lot of these kids, if you will, adults haven't seen good Rangers hockey outside of that, the 2013, 2014 teams.
True. After 94, 95, I guess it was 96, 97 is when they last made, was it the semifinals in 96, 97 that the Rangers?
They lost to the Flyers that year.
Yep. After that, and up until what year did Tortorella come in and really make a name for himself? What year was that?
Yeah, Tortorella didn't get here till 2010. I mean, you went through
13
Campbell and Muckler and Lowe and Sather and Rennie.
Yeah.
Heck, even a half a year of Brian Trottier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a lot of years, without a doubt. I just don't see that happening with Boston. Boston has done an absolutely great job, keeping their players in the forefront. Montreal Canadiens have always done that. Toronto, Chicago Blackhawks, the original 6 teams, other than the Rangers. And now you've got teams from the expansion era that are now, they've been around long enough now that they've continued to recognize their players from the late 60s, early 70s. So I think the Rangers are scrambling right now, is what I mentioned. They're reacting now to to getting some of these guys back into the fold. So it'll be interesting. I mean, Vic Hadfield's getting his number retired. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe to have the entire GAG line up in the rafters might, pique the curiosity of guys in their fans in their 30s and 40s to say, look, maybe I should do more research on these guys. And maybe that will increase the interest level of some of the younger fans in the history of the Rangers, and maybe some of guys like me who maybe have guys who are less passionate about the Rangers than I am, my age, who lost interest, to maybe rekindle that passion to start following the current Rangers a little bit more closely. I don't know, but I would like to see Brad Park, after Vic Hadfield, I would like to see Brad Park get his number retired.
Yeah, but it's been a pleasure talking about Vic Hadfield today.
It was, Tom. Rob. It really was. And we'll think about who we want to talk about next. Maybe we'll get a current state of the Rangers podcast in, maybe if not the next one, real soon. Talk about the current state of the franchise. Go off the menu a little bit. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Just to keep in mind that we can be heard on all of the podcast stations, your favorite podcast stations, Google Play, iTunes, you name it, we're on it. So please give us a look on our website. If there are any players or any type of topics you want us to talk about, please feel free to do so. We'd love to have your engagement, your participation. Again, on behalf of Rob Berger, I'm Tom Browning. This has been the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for listening. This has been a Go Tommy Boy production.